The most frequently asked question you're going to get is, hey, how's the market? Someone owns a property. They want to know how their investment is doing. And 99% of agents will answer that question. The real estate business is not really the real estate business. It's the information and relationship business. And if you create quality proprietary information about your market, that enables you to differentiate yourself from everybody else that's trying to do what you do. And to the extent you differentiate yourself, that's creating a competitive advantage.
All right, Phone Warriors Nation, we have a wonderful guest with us today. Very special indeed. He's one of the top brokers or commercial real estate agents in New York City of all time, actually. We're talking of all time. One of the OGs, as we say, the legends. Bob Knakal himself has graciously come on the Phone Warriors podcast. Bob, welcome to the Phone Warriors Nation.
Guys, so great to be with you. And first of all, I got to tell you, I love the name of the organization, Phone Warriors. Wish I had thought of it. That's a great one. And it's so apropos for a prospecting initiative, no doubt about it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to cover a lot today, and we're going to deliver as much value as we possibly can. But I'm actually going to start with a little bit different than I normally do, with one of your tweets that you had put out there last year in April of 2023, verbatim, because I think this is the best way to start for a Phone Warriors podcast, what this tweet was. And so it goes, when I am cold calling and I get hung up on, what is the first thing that I do? Call right back and say, I think we were disconnected. Half the time the recipient of the call is so embarrassed they hung up on you, right? They were actually engaged in the conversation. The other half of the time, they just start to hang up again. And then what do? You move on. So what did that, when you said that, public, what did you mean by that?
I meant exactly what I said. I think that, if you think about it from property owners' perspectives, they're probably getting called a lot of times by a lot of people. Today, especially, publicly available information is so readily available. You go online, you get somebody's home number, you get their cell phone number, you get their shoe size, you can get anything about somebody. So, people who own property probably getting inundated by calls from folks. And the instinct is, oh, let me just hang up, and they hang up and don't expect the person to call back again. And I don't know why I did it, but one time after I got hung up on, I just called right back and I just said, hey, we must have been disconnected. And I think the owner I was talking to must have felt so embarrassed that he hung up on me that we actually ended up having a pretty good conversation. So I said, wow, that worked great. So I'm going to do that from now on. And I will tell you that literally half the time, when you get hung up on, I call right back, and half the time somebody will talk to me. The other half of the time, they just slam the phone down again, but then you'll call them again in 2 or 3 months when you get back around to them. But that is a technique that has actually worked really well for me. And I think that, getting hung up on it never really bothered me that much. And I think it's important because that kind of thing happens a lot in our industry. But I think understanding the probability of success is something that makes it okay. So, I sell buildings primarily in Manhattan. And in Manhattan, south of 96th Street, which is the prime part of Manhattan, there are 27,649 buildings. The average turnover rate of that stock is about 2.6% in the average year. And that's been the case for 40 years. And about half the stuff that goes on the market actually will trade. So that's telling you that only 1 out of every 20 properties is the owner going to say, yeah, I'm thinking about selling. So if you go into a calling program and you know that the probability is 19 out of 20 people are going to either say no to you or hang up on you, you have to anticipate that level of success. So if I'm making my calls and I get hung up on 19 times in a row, I feel awesome because the probability the next one is going to be a yes is very, very high. So I think it's important to have the right perspective when you're making these calls.
Wow. So KPI is very important to you, and understanding your market, understanding your numbers, the absorption rate, which is what you're talking about. So what made you take that approach to take the numbers perspective?
You know what? I have always been a statistics guy, Richard. I really, as a kid, I played baseball, played Little League baseball, always kept track of my stats, collected baseball cards as a young kid, and I was one of the kids who spent more time looking at the back of the card than the front of the card, and just loved stats. And real estate is such a stats-oriented thing, and as a real estate broker, the most frequently asked question you're going to get is, "Hey, how's the market?" Right? Someone owns a property. They want to know how their investment is doing. How's the market going? And 99% of agents will answer that question with adjectives. My 15-year-old daughter, who doesn't know anything about the real estate market, could answer that question with adjectives and probably be fairly accurate, right? But but if you can quantify what your market is and talk with statistics, then you are able to do a couple of different things. Number one, you show that you know the market, right? I quoted some stats about the Manhattan market and the turnover rate. So you guys say, wow, this guy knows what's happening in Manhattan. But think about it, for the agent who's selling homes in the a southwest corner of Idaho, and says, hey, in this part of the state, or this part of the city, or this geographic area that I cover, there are 2,417 houses. Over the past 3 years, the average turnover has been X%. And this year, the turnover is up by 14%. And, if you start talking that way, immediately the owner says, wow, this person really understands the market, and they will believe you're a market expert, whether you do or don't. And I tell young people all the time, I said, look, you feel like you're at a disadvantage because you've only been in the business a year, 3 years. You have relatively little experience, and you're competing against people who have 20 years of experience or 30 years of experience. And you're like, how can I compete with them? Well, you know what? You can easily compete with them, because I'm telling you, if you pick a geographic region and you talk about how many properties there are in that area, I will guarantee you that the person with 20 or 30 years of experience does not know how many homes or properties are in that geographic boundary. And so immediately you're setting yourself apart, you're differentiating yourself. And everything in our business, I think it's so important to know that the real estate business is not really the real estate business. It's the information and relationship business. And if you create quality proprietary information about your market, that enables you to differentiate yourself from everybody else that's trying to do what you do. And to the extent you differentiate yourself, that's creating a competitive advantage. And that's what we're all looking for, a competitive advantage. How are we going to get an advantage over the other guy or gal that's trying to do exactly what I'm doing?
Right. And then, so that's a great point. And Bob, one thing that stands out to me is that one of the pillars of, if I can go back to the old, Bob Knakal days of Massey Knakal, right? Because I mean, you were considered, I would say, like the top 5 commercial brokerages, if not, just in New York City, but we're talking the country, or maybe, you mean that there was like a top 5 or 6 that I remember. And so you were right up there. Is that what propelled you guys, you think? I mean, how'd you you led your brokerage in that way with having a numbers focus? Is that more or less how that, transpired?
Yeah, well, Dean, I don't want this to come off as bragging, but just to put it in perspective.
Not bragging if you do it.
Good, good, thanks. The CoStar Group started tracking the investment sales market in New York in 2001. 2001 to 2014, when we sold the business, the number 2 sales company in New York had sold about 1,300 properties. Massey Knakal sold over 4,000. We lapped the field. We were competing against the big regional companies, the national companies, the global companies, and we were eating their lunch. 3x, more than 3x what the closest competitor was doing. And it was all because of this focus on information and differentiating ourselves and getting to know the areas. We set up the company with a geographic territory system, very similar to what in residential you'd call farming.
Yep.
We put lines on a map. You were responsible for that box, and call every owner in that area, get to know every sale that happened over the last 3 years, know every buyer, every seller, who owns the most buildings, who owns the most square footage, what new developments are going on in the area, what zoning changes may affect value of properties in the area, all that kind of stuff. And it was that granular information that enabled us to differentiate ourselves, and that was a competitive advantage. So even when we had started out, we had sold 3 buildings and we were competing for a 4th. And, the owner said to us, well, I'm talking to these other firms that have been around for decades. And we said, yeah, you're right. But we've only sold 3 buildings, but one was down the block, one was across the street, and one was right next door to you. And we know more about this neighborhood than anybody else. And so we can be a better advocate to convince buyers why they should pay more for your property. And you know what? We got that listing. That resonated with people. And we just did that over and over and over again.
So farming, so if you're just cold calling, this geographic area to learn about the businesses, learn about the owners, are you following up with these people at a later date as well and saying, hey, we spoke X, Y, Z, and are you cultivating relationships, or is this kind of like a one-off when you're speaking to them?
Richard, I'll explain. And this is the way I explain to people who don't understand the real estate business and are not in the real estate business. Let's say the 3 of us were going to go to Iceland and sell rocks for a living.
Okay.
What would we do? We would go and we would make up a list of everybody that owns rocks. We'd make up a list of everybody that buys rocks. We'd study the rock market and figure out how many of each type of rock there was, what rocks sell for more money, which rock sells for less money. And then we would go on a campaign of contacting repetitively the folks who own the rocks to get them to hire us. And once we establish credibility with them, develop relationships with them, get hired to sell their rocks, then we'd call the people that buy rocks. That's the brokerage business. The brokerage business is very, very simple, but it's very hard. And so the reason that we set up these territories is because you don't just make a call once and then not follow up. You are going to call each prospect. And we always thought that the best size for a marketplace was about 1,000 to 1,200 owners, individual owners, because that's a group of folks that you can call once a quarter. And based on the turnover ratios here, the 2.6% turnover ratio relates to someone when they buy a property in Manhattan, they'll own it for an average of 40 years. So you don't have to call them every week. But once a quarter, we thought was enough to develop a relationship with them. But what we did is we called them once a quarter. We sent them a piece of hard mail once a month. Then when email became popular, we'd send them an email once every week, every 2 weeks or every month. We'd send them text messages. You're constantly following up, trying to break folks down. And what this process is, I use the analogy of the Stonecutter's Creed. Stonecutter Creed is pound the rock, pound the rock, pound the rock. And so if you think about it, the stonecutter comes into the shop, sits in front of a big piece of rock, gets the mallet out and whacks that thing, hits the rock 99 times, nothing has happened. The 100th time, boom, the rock splits in half. And to the casual observer, they'll say, oh, that 100th one must have been different. You must have used a different hammer, or you must have hit it at a different angle, or maybe you hit that one harder. And the stonecutter knows, no way, Jose. What did it is the 99 blows that came before it allowed that 100th one to work. And in the same way, you have to repetitively call people, work on developing the relationship, and continue on these things. And so much of what makes a successful broker is being able to use discipline in a way that will allow you to continue to do all these very simple and often mundane things over and over again, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And I always say that the 3 characteristics that I see in the very best brokers anywhere in the country is, number one, they're an expert in something. In a very narrow sector of the market, they're an expert. They know it like the back of their hand. Number two, they have tremendous passion for the business. They love it. And you have to love it, because you know what? No matter how good you are, the market always has been, is, and always will be cyclical. You're going to have tough times. The love of the business will allow you to make it through the tough times and survive for the good times that will inevitably follow. And then that third aspect is using discipline well. And discipline will allow you to continue to make those calls when people are hanging up on you. Continue to draft content and send out email blasts and send out hard mail and go to networking events and be active on social media and do all those market presence things that you have to do to break down the resistance. As a saying, persistence breaks down resistance. So you have to keep at it over and over and over again. And so it's not jumping around. You're not like a butterfly going from one flower to the next and meandering all over the place. Right. Pick a target market and continue to keep calling them all the time. And I use as an example, there's a large owner in New York, a guy named Harry Macklow. And Harry owned, when I started cold calling back in 1984, he had a little development site on East 60th Street. I called him for 2.5 years, and he never took my call. I sent him mail all the time, but always left message. And in those days, I still write everything down on calls, but in my catalog pages for him, pages of left message, left message, left message. I called his office one night at 7 o'clock, and his assistant had gone home, and he picked up the phone. And I said, "Hey, Mr. Macklow, Bob Knakal from Coldwell Banker. Would love to." "Yeah, I know who you are. You leave messages for me all the time. What do you want?" And, Harry has become one of my best clients. I've done 23 deals with him, over $400 million worth of stuff. And if after the first 10 calls or the first 20 calls, I stopped calling him, that never would have happened. So you have to just keep at it, keep pounding the rock. And ultimately you will become successful if you have the discipline to just keep at it.
All right, I think we're done with the podcast now. Thank you, Bob. That was great. I mean, seriously, we talk about this. It's so great to hear it coming from someone like your caliber, really, and what all of you have accomplished, because so many agents that reach out to us for advice or other people and coaches and trainers, it's the same stuff. And you just said it beautifully. It's so eloquent. So everyone who's listening to this, guys, that is the business.